Scott Corcoran. I work here at the History Museum of Mobile, and we know you are kind of cooped up, getting a little stir crazy, so we wanted to bring a little of the outside ancient world to you today. I will be taking you through our current special exhibit, Ancient Rome, the empire that shaped the world, and talk to you a little bit about it and show you some of the cool stuff we have here that and we wanted to bring it to you while you're staying safe inside your home. So when we're talking about ancient Rome, we got to start at the beginning. 750 BC was the founding of the Kingdom of Rome. Legendary stories, two brothers, Romulus and Remus, battle. Romulus wins, establishing himself as the first king of Rome. Now, when we're talking about Rome at this point, we're talking about Rome. We're not yet talking about Rome. For those of you from the Mobile area, it's kind of like when we talk about Mobile in general, when we also include Saraland, Satsuma, Theodore, Irvington, when we talk about Mobile. Well, Rome was the same way. At this point, Rome was a city-state. Rome, kind of neighboring villages and towns, but it wasn't the empire we talk about. Well, the king ruled alongside the Senate, and the Senate was a minor authority figure at this point, except the Senate was in charge of selecting the new king. The Kingdom of Rome wasn't a monarchy, kind of like we understand today, where when the king or queen dies, son or daughter takes over, becomes the next king or queen. The king of Rome was selected by the Senate, but after that, the Senate had little to no authority. And these were the rich, wealthy, powerful families in Rome represented in the Senate. And so 509 BC, after being marginalized, the Senate deposes the king, establishing the Senate as the primary authority figure in Rome. Now, this establishes the Roman Republic. Now, it's under the Republic that we start seeing Rome become Rome. They start growing, expanding their territories. In 146 BC, Rome defeated its other primary challenger for supremacy, the Kingdom of Carthage. This establishes Rome as the primary power in the Mediterranean. So much so that in Latin, the term for Mediterranean, Mare Nostrum, and if my 8th grade Latin teacher is watching, please forgive me. But in Latin, Mare Nostrum translates directly to our sea. So Rome was so sold on its totality of control that it just called the Mediterranean our sea. Now, with the expanding of territory, Rome's military grew. And as it grew in number, also in power, you began to see political shifts where the most powerful people in Rome were no longer the senators, but the generals of the military. 58 BC, one of these generals conquers the territory of Gaul, what is today Spain and France, establishing himself as the most powerful of all the generals. This general, a man named Julius Caesar. After some battles with the other general, he came out on top and had himself established dictator of Rome. For those of you who've studied any form of history or literature, you know what's coming next. Some of Caesar's former allies began to get concerned about the amount of power and the way he was wielding it, so they conspired to assassinate him, had him killed. This left a power vacuum. Many people, Caesar's former allies, some of his former adversaries, including his great nephew, all battled for control of Rome. Caesar's great nephew, Octavian, came out on top, had himself declared emperor of Rome, thus establishing the Roman Empire. He changed his name to Augustus and was the first emperor of Rome. Now, Rome's ability to conquer all this territory, take control of not only the land but the populace, wasn't just due to the size of its military, but their understanding and application of physics and engineering. And if you come with me, we're going to look at some of the tools and weapons the Romans built utilizing this knowledge of physics and engineering that allowed them to not only conquer but maintain all this territory. So, before we start talking about the tools and weapons, I do want to take a couple moments to discuss the soldiers in the Roman military. The most basic unit was the centurion. Those were your frontline infantry soldiers. Now, they were issued armor, weapons, and a shield. The armor, as you can see here, it's kind of scale plated, so it allowed for full protection but some maneuverability. They were issued a short broadsword called a gladius. But when we start talking about technological innovations, I want to first talk about the Roman shield. The Roman shields were curved, which allowed soldiers, when they brought them in, their periphery was protected. But additionally, a flat shield with a flat surface will protect from arrow fires, but those arrows will be lodged in the shield, further weakening it. The more arrows, the weaker the shield becomes. Well, with the Roman curved shield, an arrow shot had to be direct on to be able to impale in the shield. If it hit one of the sides, it was more likely to glance off, allowing the shield to stay stronger and longer. Additionally, they put this 10 centimeter metal knob in the center of the shield, allowing one, the shield to be even stronger, but two, the shield could be used as a close quarters combat weapon. So when we start talking about technological innovations, we start with the shield. Now, because of the innovations of the shield, we also want to talk about the testudo formation. Testudo is Latin for tortoise. Can everybody see why this would be called the tortoise formation? Soldiers in the front would put their shields in front of them. Soldiers in the back would put their shields above their head. This allowed Roman soldiers to approach fortified structures while reducing the risk to the soldiers from the defenses as they approached. But I also want to look closely at the tools and weapons the Roman military used to accomplish this territorial expansion. Romans were able to use their knowledge of physics and engineering to build a variety of tools and weapons. Starting here with the pile driver. Utilizing pulley systems, they were able to maximize the use of their manpower by distributing heavy weight across the pulleys, having soldiers lift them up, drop them on these pilings, driving them into the riverbed. Pile driver. Now, with these pilings in place on riverbeds, it gave them the foundation they needed to build bridges. When you conquered the amount of territory Rome did, you had to be prepared for natural obstructions like rivers. So with this, they could build bridges across those rivers. Probably the most famous use of this was when Caesar crossed into Germany. To cross into Germany, you had to cross the Rhine River, one of the fastest, deepest rivers in all of Europe. With this device, he was able to build a bridge that was 4 meters wide, 500 meters long, in a period of 10 days, being able to cross into Germany. Next piece we're going to talk about is the Scorpion Ballista, large-scale predecessor to the crossbow. They were able to store energy in these twisted ropes, adding to the tension, allowing them to fire projectiles. They fired bolts, large arrows, ranging from 30 to 70 centimeters long. When fired level, the Scorpion Ballista had a range of about 100 meters with pinpoint accuracy. When fired at an angle, wasn't as accurate but could reach up to 400 meters. The next item I want to point out is the assault or siege tower. Now, this was built in field as needed, so they didn't haul these things around. Soldiers would be tasked to build these devices as needed. Now, when they came across a fortified structure and the landscape allowed it, they would build these assault towers so they could wheel up to the fortified structures. The structure itself protected soldiers as they maneuvered the staircase inside, coming to one of the levels with one of these drop doors that they could put over a castle or a fort wall, pouring troops in over the other side, reducing the effectiveness of an enemy's fortification. I have here the onager, also known as a catapult. Now, this device called an onager, it's the Latin term for mule or donkey, and it was called that not just because of its utility, but also when this device was fired, it stored so much energy that it firing the projectile, and as we know, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Well, there was so much power in the onager that it would kick backwards. So soldiers had to be very careful using this. But this device could fire projectiles ranging from 5 to 50 kilograms up to 600 meters. It was a powerful device, again, using energy stored in twisted ropes. Next item we have here is the assault ram. They were called rams because the wood piling would usually be topped with a metal cap, and the soldiers would regularly shape them into animal shapes, most often the ram. Now, these were used to weaken, destroy fortified structures, allowing the soldiers to transfer the energy from their forward momentum into the structure itself. But I want to show you something over here. Occasionally, they would build these rams into devices they would call testudos. Again, testudo, Latin for tortoise. Now, with this device, they could wheel it up to the fortified structure, soldiers in full protection, and then the ram would be suspended in there, so all the energy that the soldiers were utilizing was going to the forward momentum. This, you can kind of say, was both a troop transport and assault vehicle all in one. But being able to conquer all this territory was useless if they weren't able to maintain it. So the Romans were able to take this knowledge of physics and engineering and apply it to tools and devices, not just for warfare, but for everyday common use. I want to show you a few of those things. So one of the first tools I want to look at is the potter's wheel. The invention of this allowed the more efficient manufacturing of pottery. And we think about all the things we use pottery for today, but then glass jars, tin cans, all the things we use for storage would have been done by pottery. So it was needed, and to be able to make it quickly and more efficiently allowed for it to be made cheaper and for there to be a surplus. Now, the way the potter's wheel worked is somebody would sit, kind of lean back up against this little board here, and then stand but put one foot on the wheel. And by kicking their foot forward, would spin the wheel, allowing them to have their hands free to shape the pottery. Kind of one of the first real instances of mass production. And because of the benefit of this, they were able to use pottery for things they had never thought of before, like the Noria. Come with me. So with the excess surplus pottery they were able to produce, they started thinking of some novel ways to use it, including the Noria, or the water wheel. They would have this wooden wheel, and they mounted pottery to it, and would put it in a water source. And as say the river flowed, it would hit the pots, fill them up, and then push the pots forward. Now, with this device, they could hook the wheel itself to a gear system, like you see right here, and they were able to transfer river current energy to mechanical energy, used to power devices like grain mills, cranes, anything they needed that energy for, they were able to use from the power of the Noria. A very similar principle here with the Vitruvian screw, another wood water wheel that would turn and allow you to change river current energy into mechanical energy. Now, they also invented techniques for maneuvering water where it was needed, including the Archimedes screw. The Archimedes screw was a watertight wood tube that had an angled bolt inside of it. And they would put it in a water source at an angle. And when set in the water, there was an opening at the bottom, and as somebody twisted it, would let water in, and as it turned, gravity would move the water up the angled bolt, allowing them to move the water uphill. This technology, or the principles behind it, are still used today in like grain and corn silos, being able to move the grain up to the top of the silo to fill it up. So these principles are still in use today. These tools that they had created allowed them a greater scale of construction projects than previously were possible. The cranes, the hooks and pulleys, being able to redistribute weight and maximize the efforts of their labor, allowed large-scale building projects like the Colosseum. The Colosseum was an 80,000-seat stadium built 2,000 years ago. This stadium was where they held gladiator contests, but even put on stage dramatic performances. They could even flood the stadium floor and bring in galleys and hold mock naval battles. Now, the utility of the Colosseum was due in large part to the hippogym over here. Hippogym, direct Latin translation for underground, was the substructure of the Colosseum. You had the stadium floor here with these compartments, these multi-leveled compartments underneath, and a mechanical elevator and in the compartments you had gladiator quarters, you had animal pens, you had storage for set pieces for theatrical performances. They could raise and lower the elevator, load what they needed onto, and then move it to the top where they had these hinged doors on the floor of the stadium that they could maneuver pieces, people, animals, whatever in place with minimal disruption to the spectators. But when we talk about Rome and some of their most famous innovations, we got to take a moment to talk about the Roman road system. Rome was famous for its roads. The saying, all roads lead to Rome. Well, you couldn't develop such an intricate road system starting in, say, Barcelona and say, I want to build a road that goes to Rome and hope you're making it there. You needed precise measurements. So they developed tools for that, starting with the very first odometer. They had this small wagon, and the axle to the wagon had a gear on it, and it connected with this larger gear here. And every time the wheel rotated, it would turn the gear a little bit. After so many rotations of the wheel, it would turn the larger wheel and drop a wooden bead into the bucket. Now, they knew the circumference or the distance around the wagon wheel. They knew how many rotations or revolutions of the wheel it took to drop one bead. So at the end of a journey, they could count the number of beads in the bucket and calculate how far it went. Using information like distance with the survey equipment, like the Groma, allowed them to measure precise angles, so when they set roads in place, if you're off by even a degree, hundreds of miles down the road, that could put you off several miles of your intended target. But devices like this allowed them specific measurements to set the roads in the right place. So the reason we talk about Roman roads and how innovative they were, because as you are watching this, somewhere there is a car driving on a road built by Romans. And the reason these roads have held up this long is because of their multi-layer road construction. They would dig a trench and then fill the bottom of the trench with these larger broad rocks, top that with gravel, top that with dirt, and finish it with smooth river stones. So this allowed for drainage of the road, but the roads also weren't built flat. They were built with a slight curve, so when it did rain, water would run off to the sides. In this country, our interstate system's about 70 years old. And I don't know about you, but I have driven on plenty of interstates that have been under construction, under repair in that time. But Roman roads, because of their high quality construction, are still being utilized today with minimal maintenance and upkeep. Discussing Roman innovations, we also have to mention the aqueduct. Romans had indoor plumbing, and they were able to accomplish that by being able to move water from water sources to population centers. And they did that with their aqueduct system. They would build these kind of tubes, tunnels, that would carry water from water source to population center. But as we know, water doesn't move uphill. Water doesn't even move on flat surfaces. Water can only move downhill on a decline. But when you're talking an aqueduct that's hundreds of miles long, you need precise measurements to be able to ensure that that decline stays the same throughout. And is it so deep that it drops the aqueduct into the ground before it reaches where it needs to go? Measurements were so precise that the aqueduct would have a decline of 1 or 2 inches per mile. So they were able to build this hundreds of miles long, seeing only slight drop, being able to transport the water where it needed to go. Now, construction projects like the aqueduct, like the Colosseum, would not have been possible without the most important Roman innovation, and that's the arch. Construction projects we've looked at, like the aqueduct or the Colosseum, would not have been possible without this Roman innovation. Now, it looks purely decorative, but the arch itself, if you use like a flat crossbeam, your support is weakest in the middle, allowing or preventing precise measurements that were needed for like the aqueduct. But with the arch, weight is evenly distributed across the curve, putting all weight on the support points, meaning you can build stronger using less equipment, less man hours, more effective and efficient. So this has been a look at our current exhibit, Ancient Rome, the Empire That Shaped the World. I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for self-quarantining, for staying at home, for doing everything we need to get through this. And when we do get on the other side of this crisis, we look forward to seeing everyone back here with us at the History Museum of Mobile. Thank you, and take care of yourselves.